What are the long-term expectations for Kalen DeBoer? And I ask that because Alabama went 9-4 last year. The Crimson Tide had their worst season in terms of win-loss record since Saban's first year in 2007, where they went 7-6. Alabama went 9-4, 5-3 in SEC play. They lost to Vanderbilt, Tennessee, and Oklahoma, neither of whom had a consistent offense, neither of whom had a college football playoff offense. Oklahoma and Tennessee just had a college football playoff defense, and Vanderbilt caught Alabama napping. So I want to talk about this. You all know how the story is. Oh, it's unacceptable. They better make the playoffs this year. I don't want to quite do that with Alabama. I don't. I want to talk about the long-term expectations and less about this year. Because yes, 2025 and what they do in 2025 matters. But I also think that Saban left the roster in a worse shape than the recruiting rankings would suggest. So you have to give Kalen DeBoer, who's a different style of coach than Nick Saban, who's a younger coach from a different generation, and who's never coached in the SEC before. He's coached in the North. He's coached in lower divisions and either schools out west or schools in the North. Like Eastern Michigan and Indiana is where he became known as an OC, and then he was a coach at Fresno State, their head coach, and the head coach at Washington. It's not SEC country. So there has to be some empathy. And by empathy, I mean understanding. I don't mean sympathy. A lot of people confuse empathy and sympathy. And empathy is just understanding where someone else is coming from and understanding them. You can have empathy for your greatest enemy, and it will actually help you beat your greatest enemy by understanding them and why they will move certain chess pieces and make certain decisions the way that they do. Before I get any further, I will encourage you to subscribe, like the video, especially if you're an Alabama fan. I'd love to have more Alabama subscribers and be more connected to Alabama football. So subscribe, hit the bell, and comment what you think the long-term expectations should be for Kalen DeBoer. How much do you expect him to live up to the standard that Nick Saban set? Do you think he'll win multiple titles, or one, or none? How many titles should he win, if any? What do you think the acceptable floor on a yearly basis is? I'm curious. I love interacting with my commenters, so please tell me in the comment section. But when I look at Alabama, I see a program that was a little bit shocked by who they were and had a little bit of an identity crisis last year. That's why the discipline was all over the place. That's why players in the 2025 preseason, right after 2024 ended, were saying, oh, we're going to show up for time on workouts and take things seriously. Like, I don't think I want to hear that was an issue during the season or in the 2024 preseason. That's not something that I want to know, and that's something that Saban wouldn't have put up with. But to be fair to DeBoer, Saban's teams at the end did not do a great job at developing wide receiver talent like they had before. They did not do like Billy Napier or Curt Cignetti recruited and developed better with Alabama at wide receiver than Alabama's recent staff did under Saban. They did a better job, I think, at handling running back, at developing quarterback. I mean, Bryce Young was one of the best Alabama quarterbacks under Saban, and yet he didn't win a title. Why? Because his supporting cast wasn't as phenomenal as previous Alabama supporting casts, and I don't think they did the greatest job of developing him. Straight up. Look at the defenses under Pete Golding. They were nowhere near the Kirby Smart defenses or the Jeremy Pruitt defenses. They never were, even if hypothetically they had similar amounts of talent. I think the assistant coaching fell off. I think the coordinators, they fell off. And I think Saban got older. And I think Saban even fell off a little bit too. And therefore, despite Alabama, because of Saban's reputation, because the fact they had apex recruiters and Saban would demand that, and several elite players wanted to play for him, and Alabama's a blue blood, they have good pipelines, they're in a talent-rich state and area and conference, they fell off. They were not as talented as prior Alabama teams, and then sticking them in an expanded SEC with Oklahoma and Texas joining, who are blue bloods, who are historically closer to Alabama than they are to even Texas A&M or LSU, that is going to make things tougher. It just is. And I think that while Kalen DeBoer should have high expectations placed upon him, and I think that last year, yes, cannot be the norm. Josh Pate said this on Crane and Company the other day. How do we know Saban wouldn't have had some 9-3 seasons in this new era? Well, you don't, because he left. He left after 2023. And I don't blame him either when players are constantly asking him for raises and new NIL deals. And then when Michigan came out as flat and had such a bad game as they did in the Rose Bowl, and Alabama came out on fire and Michigan still beats you. Michigan played one of their worst games in 2023 that I watched, and I watched that team closely. Alabama was playing one of their best games, and I watched them a whole lot. I actually admittedly watched them kind of annoyed for much of the year because I'm thinking to myself, you have a top 3 talent roster, and you cannot pull away from a team to save your life, and you needed basically a Hail Mary to beat Auburn. But they did it. They were clutch. They won close games, and Saban kept them together and improved them throughout the year. To make all that progress, to have a top 3 talent roster, and then to go out against a Michigan team who started off flat, who only had a top 15 talent roster, and then play one of your better games and just lose to them and have your QB get sacked 5+ times, that's not encouraging. And more importantly than that, because I think Saban had a lot of things, from my perspective at least then, set up for him to come back and make a run in 2024, there's behind-the-scenes issues that none of us know about. And it turns out that players, well, they want NIL raises. They want to be guaranteed basically a better salary the following year. And that right there, for a coach like Saban, where Saban's all about developing people into better people, not just better players, but better people. And Saban's about loyalty and sticking it out and grinding through and being only paid. The SEC is tougher with Oklahoma and Texas. That's the point. And at the end of the day, you don't know. You do not know if Nick Saban wouldn't have had a 9-3 year this year. You don't know that. He could have. Alabama's roster did not look good by the end of the year. Do you remember the second time they played Michigan in 2024, where Michigan's backups made Alabama look like Texas when they played Georgia the first time, where they were completely starstruck, deer in headlights? How are these guys physically impaling us every play? That was bad. That was an indictment, in my view, of a lot of things Alabama when it comes to coaching, when it comes to development, maybe even when it comes to strength and conditioning. Maybe I'm going too far on that, but I don't think DeBoer inherited the best situation. So I think that, combined more importantly with the fact that the SEC is tougher with Oklahoma and Texas, means 9-3 has to be accepted as a type of floor some years. It shouldn't be the most common result, far from it. But an occasional 9-3 year here is not the end of the world. And if you hear the tornado siren in the background, my apologies. I can't control that while I'm live. Anyway, for example, Alabama in 2010, they brought back Mark Ingram, they brought back Greg McElroy from their 2009 national title team. They went 9-3 regular season, won their 10th game in the bowl game against a Michigan State team who had nowhere near the talent they did. So Saban went 9-3 in 2010, and now the SEC is tougher, and you don't have the same talent advantage you did because Saban, one of the greatest recruiters and developers and coaches of all time, isn't there, and Alabama does not have the largest NIL fund, so the game isn't as favorable towards them as it used to be. You have to give some grace and a little bit more leeway and flexibility to this new regime under DeBoer. But I will also say that Kalen DeBoer, I think, needs to win the SEC and a national championship. He can't just continue to miss Atlanta. He can't, and I know it's only year one, but just saying, what if this continues? What if the disappointment of last season continues into 2025 and beyond? He can't do that over and over again. He can't miss Atlanta for several years. He can't not win a title at Bama while he's there. He has to win one in his tenure, in my mind, because Alabama's a blue blood with resources and talent, and I don't think it's unrealistic. Now, at the same time, there's that whole dilemma where Ohio State fans had with Ryan Day, for example, where they wanted him fired after the Michigan game, and I said, look, I get it, because that loss to Michigan was a disaster, and at that point, it looked like Day may have had his most disappointing year in year 6 with Ohio State, which would have been a sign that the program was going down. Now, they ended up winning it all, which doesn't, it erases most of your sins, if not all of them, but it also doesn't erase some of the issues that they had, though they're fixing that with their coaching staff, and I think Day's one of the best in the business. Regardless of that, though, let's say Ohio State beat Tennessee but then lost to Oregon a second time. You're not firing Ryan Day. That would be insane. He wins 11 games every year and is constantly in the national title race, the Big Ten championship race, and he wins the games he should win on top of beating some good teams. Loses to some good teams as well, but who doesn't? Even Nick Saban lost to some good teams. Kirby Smart does. Dabo Swinney does. So this is not me saying if he doesn't win a title in X amount of time, he should be fired, or even if he doesn't win the SEC in X amount of time, he should be fired. But Alabama should still hold the standard of this is a national championship contender, this is an SEC contender, and we want to reach the college football playoff 90% of the time. If not 100% of the time, but if one year you miss it here and there, as long as you make it and try to improve and make changes, then it's not that big of a deal at the end of the day, and you'll rebound and you'll get better and you'll live up to the Alabama standard. So that is my view on Kalen DeBoer. And I think, yes, he needs to win the SEC, a national championship. And ultimately, I'm still optimistic about his tenure at Alabama. I really am. I think that he's going to succeed. I do think, especially since he's a younger coach and a guy who I think can be at Alabama for a while, if he's able to survive, if he's able to improve off of last year's failures, I do think that, yes, he will eventually win a title. He'll be there for a while. He'll win the SEC at some point. I think he'll figure out some things that he left Washington with and maybe brought to Alabama, and it just didn't translate. The guy's smart. He's a schematic genius. What he did to Kirby Smart last year, Sark the year prior, what he did at Washington, what he did with Michael Penix at Indiana, I think shows that he's high IQ, football-wise and just in general. Very intelligent. I think he's a good leader, good coach. I have him as a top 5 coach right now. So Alabama, you have a great coach. Do not run him off. Let him integrate his system, and if it doesn't work then I'll be wrong and you should get someone new. But he does need some time to get Alabama back to being a team that can be one of the best in the country. Because at the end of Saban's tenure, his teams were not that. 2021 Alabama, one wide receiver gets hurt, and they are no longer close to the best team in America. It doesn't happen to the best teams. Ohio State had their best wide receiver, their 2 best injured in 2022, and nearly beat 15-0 Georgia. Like, Ryan Day and Ohio State ever since 2021 have been a much better program than Alabama has, in my mind. Georgia has been. Michigan, I would say, even has been. And that's including their down year last year. So Bama fell off a little bit toward the end of Saban, and then he left because he knew he couldn't do it the way he wanted to anymore, and he didn't want to lose his edge. DeBoer comes in and has the expectations of Saban, while at the same time Saban at the end of his tenure wasn't fulfilling his own expectations. Again, that's why he retired, because he couldn't fulfill them anymore. So maybe this year they can be a title contender with all they bring back, and they certainly should make the playoffs this year. Doesn't mean I'm picking them to. I know a lot of people aren't, and I understand why, but I think eventually DeBoer will figure it out with the Alabama Crimson Tide.